Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for attending this session before we go into the chapel. This is a moderated Q&A session. My name is Deacon Greg Lowe. I'm the Director of the West Australian Catholic Migrant and Refugee Office, which is an agency of the Catholic Archdiocese of Perth. So welcome, and it's good to see so many people here. I'd like to introduce members of the panel so that you know who they are and so that you can ask some questions later if you need to. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Dr. Fiona McGaughey, who is an Associate Professor in International Human Rights Law at the University of Western Australia. She is a co-founder of UWA's Modern Slavery Research Cluster and has published widely on human rights topics including modern slavery, the United Nations human rights bodies and mechanisms, NGOs and international human rights law, Indigenous rights, international human rights law, and COVID and teaching human rights. She is originally from Northern Ireland and initially worked across Europe as a management consultant before moving to the not-for-profit sector in Ireland and Australia in human rights and equality research and policy roles, which she did for over 10 years. So welcome. Could you please welcome her? And Dr. Fiona will be acting as moderator today. Next, I'd like to introduce Martijn Boersma, who is an assistant professor at the University of Notre, Australia, and an adjunct fellow at the University of Technology Business School in Sydney. His research focuses on the intersection of business and society and includes areas such as labour standards in supply chains, corporate governance and social responsibility, gender diversity in corporate leadership, modern slavery, and employment and industrial relations. And his co-authored book, Addressing Modern Slavery, published in 2019, informs a broad audience about the scourge of this current reality. The book was endorsed by Kumi Nadu, former Secretary General Amnesty International, who said this book is both a wake-up call and a powerful demonstration of how connectivity and collaboration can help us eradicate a systematic and urgent challenge. And Jenny Byrne, former New South Wales Interim Anti-Slavery Commissioner, said that the book expertly confronted the tragic reality of modern slavery and shows us how exploited men, women and children are harmed in the global supply chains. So welcome, Martijn. Shaeron Yapp, welcome. Shaeron is the Principal Advisor Human Rights in the Communities and Social Performance Area of Expertise team for Rio Tinto. Prior to her current role, Shaeron worked in sustainability strategy at South 32, and before that she was the Manager of Strategic Policy and Business at the Walk Free Foundation. She was part of the team who successfully advocated for the Australian Modern Slavery Act and launched the Bali Process Government and Business Forum in the Indo-Pacific. She is board director of a small non-for-profit organisation, Initiate Australia, which provides education scholarships for young people interested in social justice and international development. So welcome, Shay. And Jenny. Since 2019, Jenny Stanger has been the executive manager of the Anti-Slavery Task Force, Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney, and the Australian Catholic Anti-Slavery Network, often referred to as ACAN. Jenny is a member of the Australian Government's Modern Slavery Expert Advisory Group and National Roundtable on People Trafficking and Slavery. Before her current role, Jenny was the National Manager of the Salvation Army's Freedom Partnership to End Modern Slavery, and during that time, Jenny brought together 18 Australian heads of faith, the Australian Freedom Network, to call publicly for an Australian Modern Slavery Act. Jenny has consulted for the US State Department Office to monitor and combat trafficking in persons, and also for the United Nations in Myanmar, the United Kingdom, Fiji, Tonga, Kiribati, Malaysia, and Mexico. Just to finish, I should mention that since 1998, Jenny has supported many people and their families who have been impacted by modern slavery. And she established and operated Australia's only refuge for people who have experienced modern slavery, and she's been doing that for a decade. So on behalf of the Christmas Reflection and Modern Slavery Committee, welcome to you all. It's good to have 4 people, your presence here together in one place to share your wisdom and your knowledge. It is indeed a privilege. So thank you very much. And Dr. Fiona, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Greg, and thank you for the lovely introductions. And good evening, everyone. So I am not going to say too much at this point, and rather I'm going to put some questions to our very impressive panelists. I'm sure you'll agree. Shaeron, I'm going to start with you. We're talking this evening about modern slavery, but obviously it's a really broad term. Can you talk us through what it means and maybe give us some examples?
No problem. Hi, everybody. I am surrounded by academic experts here and people who know it far better than I can, but what I might do is try and explain it to you as the way that I'd explain it at Rio Tinto when I do a lot of training to business, to my colleagues about modern slavery. And basically the first thing I would tell them is that it's a crime. So first and foremost, this is serious criminal exploitation, and it is illegal in every single country in the world, but it still continues to happen in every single country in the world, including Australia. And the facts and figures are showing that actually developed nations are continuing to see increases in modern slavery, which is pretty shocking. And it's happening in Perth, and Jenny can probably share more about that. But it is, when we talk about modern slavery, we're using an umbrella term to talk about some very specific legal concepts and crimes. They include debt bondage, human trafficking, slavery, servitude, forced labour. I missed any. But there's lots of different distinct crimes within there, and often they are also connected. And so some examples of that can look like what we've seen. I don't know if many of you have been following the news about the World Cup in Qatar, but a lot of those migrant workers were sort of lured into those jobs under false pretenses and essentially in situations of forced labour and debt bondage where they could never pay back the debts that they had paid to get that job. And so that's slavery. Another example is what we've been seeing during COVID. A lot of the people that work on our ships and vessels, Australia is hugely dependent on vessels to get all of our products in and run our businesses. And so the people that work on those vessels are called seafarers. And during COVID, they were at the worst, sort of in situations of forced labour, where they couldn't leave those vessels due to many different reasons, and their freedom had been stripped away. And so that's the central concept when you're thinking about slavery. It's where someone's freedom has been stripped away from them. And it's not always chains and being bonded or the sort of images you might have remembered. It can be stripped away from just threats and coercion. It can be invisible chains that are taking people's freedoms away. And that's why we continue to see it persist, because it's tied to some of the world's biggest challenges that we're seeing at the moment: inequalities, mass migration, displaced people, conflict, climate change. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Shaeron. I think actually that was an excellent example and probably better than the academics could provide. I'll speak only for myself there, Martijn. I should have also just said at the beginning, as you'll have worked out from Shaeron's examples and definitions, that this is a sensitive topic, and so some of this evening's discussions may be a bit unpleasant or disturbing, and of course if you do want to step away and not listen to any particular parts of it, that's completely fine. We do understand that. Thank you for that, Shaeron. So Jenny, I'm going to move to you. As Greg outlined, you've got a really extensive background in this area, and I thought it might be useful if you could just tell us a little bit about your work and what you've done with regard to modern slavery.
There we go. So I think the bulk of my professional life in this area has really been at the coalface, what we'd say is, at the front line, working with people who have been directly impacted by this issue. And that includes people who maybe have been referred to organizations that I've worked for who are even still in slavery and are seeking a way out. So I've been involved in many scenarios where you learn information about people who may be in a situation of modern slavery, and they want to try to find a way out and a way that's safe and gives them choice and control over when and how they might leave that situation. Also, in ways where someone's escaped from a slavery situation and ran and found another organization and then have been referred to me for support. And look, there's a whole heap of ways that someone may surface or come out of a slavery situation. And I've been involved in organizations where we've actually had to set them up from scratch. The work I did in the United States, there were no organizations 20 years ago that were specifically set up to respond to people in need. So I've worked with men, women, young people trafficked for, the sex industry definitely gets a lot of attention and has received a lot of attention over the years, but we've got such a strong focus now on forced labor in a range of other industries, so construction, Shaeron mentioned seafaring, factories, farms, fisheries, forests. There's so many industries where labor rights are weak or unregulated, or there's just so much criminal activity that's embedded in those business models that people can find themselves trapped in these situations. So I think we didn't mention that the latest estimate is that there's about 50 million people estimated to be in some form of this umbrella term of modern slavery all around the world today. And I think what's probably more surprising to people is we think that there's 15,000 people in slavery in Australia right now, right this minute. And so since I've been here, since 2004, I have had many, many scenarios and people that I have worked with, men, women, and children, who have been trafficked for all kinds of different kinds of slavery. And some of the ones are, it's stuff that you wouldn't think of. One case that got referred to me involved a woman who was trafficked here for her kidney by someone who recruited her from overseas. This woman was dying, and this young woman was recruited, and she was promised permanent residency and money in exchange for her kidney. And she thought those people could give that to her, and she thought that was legal. That young woman ran away because when she arrived here as the donor of the kidney, she was living with these people while they were preparing all the medical tests and everything, and they were forcing her to do housework and be the carer also for the woman who was sick. And that really bothered her a lot, actually made her really angry, and she decided to run away. But a hospital social worker who had been to a workshop that we had run was her social worker, and got in touch with her after she ran away, and luckily we had trained her in this recognizing human trafficking and slavery. And then that woman was referred to us, we supported her. She ended up going to the federal police and being recognized as a victim by the Commonwealth, but there was no offense in the code, Commonwealth Criminal Code, that could adequately target this organ trafficking scenario. And that one case resulted now there's a specific offense in the criminal code to target organ trafficking, and now specific guidance by the government that's been sent to hospitals across the country around this. So, we got to keep our minds open to when, where, and how this kind of exploitation and abuse of people can happen. So that was a really interesting one, the organ trafficking. Criminal activity. This is a one that I think is sometimes hard for people to get their mind around, that someone who might have smuggled drugs into the country at the border might have actually been forced to do that by a criminal network. And it's absolute forced, coerced criminal activity, and it's another form of human trafficking that we may not think of. So I've had multiple cases like that. It's And we should also remember that this is something that men can experience. In the unregulated labor markets or the loosely or informal economy like labor hire, where there's construction, cleaning, security, those kinds of industries, people are really vulnerable to those practices. So it's happening here. Behind the statistics, there are real people. And I think we need to do a lot more in the community to be alert and aware to what slavery can look like, and then what to do if you think someone needs some assistance.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And we'll return to that point, I think, later. And a really good example of how important education and awareness raising is. And Shaeron, you also spoke about, the training that you would do in Rio Tinto. So now I'll come to another educator. Martijn, your role, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about that, and particularly talk to us about what modern slavery looks like within Australian businesses and supply chains.
Sure, thanks, Fiona. So we heard the statistic of 50 million people being enslaved. Of those, about 27.6 are in forced labor. Of those, about 15 million are in forced labor connected to the private economy. So those people are exploited in supply chains that, brought this microphone here, for example, electronics, the shoes you wear, the clothes you wear. If you buy that cheap T-shirt from Kmart, for example, that those are goods that are like such thin margins that oftentimes somewhere in some country someone's being exploited. And I think one thing that I suppose also need to add to just briefly, when we talk about modern slavery, we see that as part of a continuum. I think that some people are initially in circumstances where they might get paid a little, but then through a variety of reasons they might sort of have working conditions deteriorate. And you heard COVID before, and that was one of these events where people started to sort of get trapped in situations that could be described as slavery. Sort of the consciousness raising moments that many Australians have been experiencing recently, consumers but also investors, have been prompted by the introduction of the Modern Slavery Act in Australia, which requires companies above a certain annual revenue threshold to report on modern slavery. And that has prompted an urgent need for knowledge, basically, in the market. And Fiona and I have been part of a team that have been analyzing the annual statements produced by companies. And let's just say there's a lot of room for improvement. So it's basically a gap in the market. And I'm happy to be part of, and very proud to be part of, a range of postgraduate programs that have been introduced by the University of Notre, Australia, where there was basically a realization that not only does this type of education fit really well with the social justice ideals of the university, but and I mention this every time I speak to cohorts about these programs. If you put in modern slavery as a search term on seek.com.au, then there's a whole range of jobs that comes up. So people think it's a really niche thing to be studying, but there's a real demand for these sort of skills and knowledge about this topic in the market right now. So I'm really proud to be part of these programs.
Thanks so much, Martijn, and thanks for explaining about the Modern Slavery Act, because I think that really has been significant, at least in terms of people's awareness. And on that point, then, Shaeron, I'm going to come back to you. Because you work in one of the businesses that would have to comply with the Modern Slavery Act. Could you tell us a little bit about what steps businesses can take, and maybe any good practice examples that you've got?
No problem. So there's a range of steps that we have to take by law. So the Modern Slavery Act has mandatory criteria that says these are what corporates who have a turnover of over 100 million a year have to report on the steps that they're taking to address slavery. And so I won't bore you with the legal definitions of all of that, but the basic things that we'd be doing is firstly just establishing really good governance and writing the right policies and the right procedures and processes, and making sure it doesn't just sit in one little part of the big company. It can't just be owned by legal, or it can't just be owned by someone with human rights in their title. It really touches every part of the business, so it's cross-functional. And so it's a lot of bringing together people saying, let's work together on this issue. And so having good governance and accountability is important. And then we'll do a range of assessments. So you have to both look at your own operations and you also have to look at your supply chains. So Rio Tinto has 50,000 employees in 35 different countries and over 60 operations. So that in and of itself is a huge job. And then we have 20,000 direct suppliers. So really just trying to grapple with the size of the issue. You can't do it all, so you really have to prioritise and really learn where are those most serious issues that if we don't get it right, you could never fix that. So really the concept of prioritisation and trying not to do it all is so important for big global corporations. So we do assessments on our supply chains and we do assessments, human rights, broader assessments on our operations. And then I just do a lot of training and awareness raising and just really trying to get people to understand the issue and then understand how to spot the red flags and how to report it if they have concerns, and then just developing tools and processes to really make this practical so that it's not just a theoretical concept but it's something that people can do in their everyday jobs at Rio Tinto or big companies to really make sure that we're more broadly respecting people's human rights in the way that we conduct our business. And then the final thing I'll just say is that all of this is interconnected. So Rio Tinto's supply chains are connected with so many other companies' supply chains in the world. So we could never do this by ourselves. So the importance of collaboration is so crucial. And so we work with lots of our peers and our suppliers. We've set up this group called HateTrek, which is the Human Rights, Resources and Energy Collaborative. We've got over 30 different mining companies all joined a part of that now, and we work together. This isn't something that we compete on or that we're trying to be the best at. Like, we have to do this together. We share knowledge, we share what's working, we share what's not, so that we really can make sure that we're not just creating lots of paperwork, but we're actually trying to have impact in addressing the issue.
Thanks so much, Shaeron. And I think you're not taking enough credit for your role in that. And I think it's a really quite a unique network that you've set up and really important. Jenny, did you want to come in with something there as well?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure that I was planning on mentioning, but this school is also responding to modern slavery. So this is an Edmund Rice school, and the Modern Slavery Act also captures large nonprofit organizations, which is a unique part of the Act. So that means most of Catholic, the large Catholic institutions across Australia are also required to do the same things that Rio Tinto is doing. And Greg mentioned in the introduction that I'm part of the Australian Catholic Anti-Slavery Network, which after the law passed, we brought together as many Catholic large entities that we could find, because many did not realize the Act had passed. Many did not realize that they had reporting obligations as well. And sort of organically, this network was born because, like Shaeron has said, collaboration is key. And with collaboration, you've also got more leverage and more influence with the 164,000 suppliers that are within our network. So we've got 51 Catholic entities collaborating on the very same kind of modern slavery risk management stuff that corporate Australia is having to do. So Archdiocese of Perth has been a member right from the beginning, Edmund Rice, and if you want to look into the Catholic response to the Act, you can visit the ACAN website. But it's really exciting to be part of that work and to be able to dive in to how organizations procure their goods and services. We're really, really learning a lot and bringing together a part of the Catholic Church that's never been brought together before in this way. So it's quite exciting work, but we do have a long way to go.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Could I also ask, because in some ways you're doing quite similar work to Shaeron, but you're doing it for a very different type of organisation. And Martijn mentioned earlier the sort of social justice ethos of Notre Dame and how the work that he does aligns with that. Do you feel like that ethos is something that is supportive of your work in terms of the network?
Absolutely. And I think, the role that Pope Francis has played in raising awareness and also calling for action on modern slavery globally for quite a number of years now. That's been crucial. But yeah, I think the, getting the Catholic institutions and entities on board like that Catholic social teaching has made it, I wouldn't want to say easy, but it's a no-brainer, right? Now it's really about doing measurable, effective actions that are going to mean something for that person who might be cleaning the school who might be exploited, or for that person who made the bricks that ended up in the building, or, you know. So that's the real work that's going to take quite some time, I think, for us to start to see results. But that is our work. Our work is to make sure that everybody associated with the operation of this nonprofit organization is safeguarded against modern slavery.
Thanks for that. Martijn, could I move to you then, just to kind of start to look forward a little bit? So far, it has sounded quite positive. We've got this legislation in place. We've got all of these not-for-profits and businesses and Commonwealth entities who all take action. We've got specific provisions in the criminal code. But could I ask you, do you think there are things that need to change for us to tackle this more effectively?
Yeah, good question. So for the nerds, if you will, that are constantly focused on the Modern Slavery Act, such as the people here on this panel, we've been working on submissions to the review of the Modern Slavery Act. That's been in place for 3 years. So we've made suggestions as to how it can be improved. And one of the ways in which, from my personal perspective, it can be improved, and I think, Fiona, you would share that view with me because we wrote the submission together, is that, like, right now, it's the way in which the act is enforced is through the market. So the idea is that consumers will, for example, take their business elsewhere if they find out that a company is doing poorly on their modern slavery reporting. Same for investors. The idea is that, well, if an investor sees, and especially large institutional investors that are very influential, if they see that a company is doing a poor job on reporting on modern slavery, then they might, divest, or they might otherwise engage with the company to try and get them to do a better job. That has so far not really been playing out in the way that I think was intended. There's a few parallels that can be drawn as well. I think that the idea of market-based enforcement has been applied in terms of gender equality in companies as well, in terms of the number of women on boards, the gender pay gap, etc., etc. And the gender pay gap is closing, but at a glacial pace. So there's a lot to be said for alternative enforcement mechanisms, whether that is financial penalties, but also potential other ways in which companies can really be, I suppose, made to comply. Because right now what we find is that a lot of companies are not even technically compliant, so they're not meeting basic requirements that the Act sets out, but also there's not really a case of substantive compliance, so we don't really see much meaningful reporting amongst companies in terms of the actual actions that they're taking, whether that's effective. So they're all great first steps, and there's a lot of great strides have been made, and there's a lot of analogies that you can use in terms of like climbing a mountain and whatnot. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement there.
Thanks for that. Jenny, if I could come back to you on a similar vein, I have another question for you. But you talked about the 15,000 people estimated in Australia who live in situations of modern slavery, but yet we know that very few people come forward, as if that's some kind of choice, but we know about very few of those people, and certainly in terms of prosecutions, for example, of people who've carried out those crimes, it's almost non-existent. Do you have any suggestions on what needs to change in that type of area?
Yes. So, and look, I think slavery crimes are like other crimes, domestic violence and other, coming forward and going through a criminal justice process is really challenging. It's really confronting. It's really traumatic. You have to face the person that did horrible things to you, and you may lose. So, if there's an alternative, most people, in my experience, would rather do the alternative. And criminal justice doesn't always get money justice, and people actually really want money justice. So we're always very focused on, making sure people are informed of their opportunity to work with police and pursue, maybe jail for that person, for the person that did these things. Another concern for people is, well, okay, even if they go to jail, they're probably going to get out of jail. I've worked with people where they were successfully prosecuted someone, but that person only got 5 or 6 years. And actually the disappointment on the victim's face afterwards of like, they got 5 or 6 years, they're going to be out, and they know everything about me. They know where my family live. So it doesn't always provide the kind of remedy that we wish it would. Now, money justice, however, can provide remedy, and that's what people the wages that they should have been paid, and sometimes damages. And look, money never can undo what happened. Sometimes apology, some kind of recognition of harm by the perpetrators, or by if a business has been involved in harm, recognition, apology, money justice, retraining, a different job, and most people I've worked with have always said, I just don't want this to happen to someone else. So whatever I can do, however I can be a part of making sure this doesn't happen to someone else, I want to be a part of that. So, supporting people on their recovery journey can look a lot of different ways. One of the biggest cases in the United States, it's a funny little part of remedy, but that case was so important that it now has a place in the Smithsonian Museum. So if you go into the Smithsonian Museum in the section around labor rights in America and labor movements in America, the largest slavery case in the United States has an exhibit, and the artifacts, which were the evidence from the criminal case, the artifacts from the case are there, and for the victims to be able to have that as part of their story. So remedy and support and help can look a lot of different ways for people. And for some people, sometimes doing nothing is what they want to do. They just want to be safe and away from the people that did these things to them, and they just want to start over. And so when you're supporting people, you really have to make sure that they're informed about all their options and empowered to make those choices for themselves, and support them to get what's best for them.
Thanks so much. I have a quick follow-on question for you, because when we discussed this panel, we said it would be really good if people had an idea where to go if they wanted to find out more, or what they should do if they had concerns about potentially a situation of modern slavery. Do you have any quick tips on that for us?
Well, for people here in WA, there's the Migrant and Refugee office. You can always contact Greg. Also the Salvation Army, where I used to work for a decade doing this work. The Salvation Army in Graceville Center is an actual service that you can contact if you have information that's concerning. So we always try to ask people to be a little bit cautious about kind of, going out and calling 000. You call 000 if you have information about a life-threatening emergency, but if you have information of concern, you should contact other people to discuss that information, have it assessed, and then what to do next. Oh, and sorry, Circle Green Legal Services as well. So yeah, you've got a few organizations here in Perth that have reach across the whole state, and they're people that you can rely on for some assessment of that information.
Thanks so much, and I think really good advice in terms of talking to someone about concerns. Martijn, if I could come to you then and ask you, if this is obviously such a complex issue that requires a dedicated effort from all different segments of society, what role do you think academics and universities should play?
Quite a big role, and that starts with, as an academic, not just publishing in obscure journals that sit on the shelf somewhere that other academics look at, maybe, if you're lucky. So the type of research that Fiona and I have been doing, as well as other people, is, try and basically engage non-academic audiences as well. So we try and get our research on modern slavery in the media. We do public reports to make sure that it's accessible, so that we're not laboring away for like a niche audience, and we just make sure that we sort of produce relevant content. And the other thing is with the postgraduate programs at Notre Dame is to be, well, we are basically educating the future business leaders effectively. And if we are truly going to try and make a change in this space, we have to sort of, start when young people, I say this as, let's not go there. When they're still relatively malleable, and we can, still impress upon them values that go beyond profits, but also are around purpose and principle. And I think that the earlier we do that, the better. And I think that, that's really a core component of universities generally, but in, University of Notre Dame specifically.
And can I ask you a quick follow-up in terms of discipline? I mean, my experience is that this tends to get a little bit siloed into, for example, that belongs to the law school, they teach human rights, or maybe a little bit of it belongs in the business school because it's got something to do with supply chains. Do you think there's a way to kind of move beyond that and make it properly multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary?
I think there's no way around that. It touches on law and business definitely, but I've been working with other research teams that includes, for example, fashion scholars, and then you talk about garment supply chains that go into Bangladesh or other sort of Asian countries where we know that there's a lot of sweatshops, and working together with them to try and find ways in which we can bring elements of circularity to that, or to encourage a living wage and sort of betterment of working conditions. So I think it definitely transcends boundaries and disciplines in that way, and I think that's a great way to spread the message as well. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Last question was for you, Shaeron. Obviously, I'm sure people listening think I'd like to do something about this. Are there practical steps that people can take?
Yeah, definitely. And just to close out on what you were saying is that the corporates are desperate for people to do these jobs, and I've just been hiring and it was really hard to find people, so it's really exciting to hear that they're coming up through the pipeline, because we need more and more people who will just be able to look at more broadly at human rights and sustainability, because this is all connected to issues of like environmental issues and social issues, and corporates are desperate for it. But so other than encourage people to study this at school and university, I think what you're doing now is a really first important step, is just learning more about it, just trying to understand the issue. There's so much training resources out there, there's books that you can read, there's lots of really interesting documentaries on Netflix, and there's lots of ways to really understand how this issue looks like today. And then learn how to spot the issues as well. It doesn't matter what your role is, if you're a nurse or a social worker or you're in a business, just learn what your role or your responsibility could be to spot the red flags. And then more broadly, as individuals, we all have buying power. So what are we buying? Really educate yourself about the things that we're eating, the products that we're wearing, also the businesses that we're investing in. So you can read the modern slavery statements. I'd also encourage you not to take it at face value, because some of the companies like IKEA and even those bigger retailers are doing amazing transparency work. And so really investigate it and prod it. And if you don't understand and it doesn't make sense, then ask questions. You can write letters. You can consumers have a very powerful voice today. So I'd encourage you to do that. And then, there's obviously really great ways to donate as well to lots of different non-for-profits and organisations that really need financial support. At Christmas time, one of the ones that's really nice to support is some of the Mission to Seafarers. They will often produce some Christmas hampers for these people that are at sea and away from their families at Christmas time, and they'll just give them little luxuries that we would take for granted, like chocolates or body products or things just that or souvenirs. They love souvenirs from Australia, and so there's lots of ways. There's a local mission in Bunbury and Fremantle, and I think there's lots of different Catholic ones as well that you can either just donate goods or donate your money. I think they'd really find that valuable over the Christmas period. But there's just a few ways, but I always come back to that fundamental thing of just making sure you're talking about it within your companies, talking about it within your families and your communities, and just raising awareness of the issue, because I guess the thing about modern slavery is that when it's hidden, that's where the issue is. So the more that you can bring it into, and what we're talking about today, into the light, and then that criminal exploitation can be addressed. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Shaeron. I think that was lots of good food for thought for us. I might just quickly thank everyone. I think Greg probably wants to say a few words as well. No? Okay, thank you. All to me. So look, the wonderful thing about doing these things is each time I learn something new as well. So I think we've been really lucky to have 3 really genuine experts on the topic, and people who work really kind of hands-on in terms of their familiarity with the issues within Australia and overseas. And so can I just ask that everyone join me in thanking the panellists?
Yeah, I will pop in because I also want you to say thank you to Fiona for moderating as well, please. So thank you, Fiona. And just to finish, just during the session, I maybe it's just something I felt, but I want to thank you as well, because I got the impression that there was some deep listening happening. Maybe it's just me, but you seem to be very attentive. I was, but I'm feeling a bit cold, so I don't know if it was because you were feeling cold or not. So thank you very much for being here and giving your time to this session. We'll be going into the chapel soon at about 7, so you've got time to perhaps have a stretch and to meet people. So thank you very much.